So my name's Dean, as you are aware. I'll get to meet quite a lot of you over the next couple of days, and I'm very much looking forward to that, partly just because it's Oktoberfest. I think that's what we're all here and looking forward to. And I wanted to start off today by saying that we are living in a material world, and I am a material girl. In fact, you know that we are living in a material world and that I am a material girl. And when you stop and think about that for a second, I want you to sort of imagine yourself that we're not actually here in BMW world, that we're not actually marketers, that actually you're human beings, that you're consumers, that we are here for a purpose, and what we're trying to do is understand how do we connect with one another, and with the devices that we're using are merely tools and extensions of our personality. Because I think once we start going back to that absolute core, we understand what it really means. I mean, for me, at home, I love playing the guitar. I want to sit on a comfortable sofa. I want a nice bed at night. And for all the gadgets and the gizmos that I can sort of talk about, in terms of what we're looking at here, I have an app on my iPhone that I can control my house. I can turn the heating on, I can turn the lights on and off, it alerts me when people are coming in and out of the house, and it's all being done from a little home automation Mac Mini that is speaking to my iPhone app. And for all the great, wonderful stuff in there that we're able to do, it really is about where we're sort of taking these things in. The fact that there are now more network devices on the planet than there are people. The age of the cyborg is finally here. And suddenly, this whole notion, well, what does that mean in a digital world, when our digital world has suddenly broken out of the PC and into that car and the screen and into my hand on my mobile and everything else that we're sort of doing? Step out of my office in New York, and that is my digital world. And it's the way the screens are shouting and screaming for my attention, the things that are blinking around. It isn't some kind of future reality, it's very much today. This idea of the future that we had when I was a boy 20, 30 years ago, well, perhaps I'm not quite flying around in cars yet, although apparently I'm being told they're working on it, with the hover car. But these ideas of these screens that are shouting and screaming and blinking, and you step out of go to sort of Shanghai or any other major city, and suddenly those buildings by day are billboards by night. It's not stuff stuck on to the building, it's fully integrated within the building. It's becoming organic, it's becoming part of our culture, of our environment, especially as we sort of look around the various things. And so it asks the question, what is for the next generation? Where do these kids start from? What's sort of going to be the world that they are going to sort of find themselves growing up in terms of what's next? As they sort of grow on, it's this we're having to be surrounded by data. This whole idea that we have to sort of break ourselves out of this 12, 15-year-old mentality of, well, did I click on an ad? There are 196 computers running these screens. And they're having visual stimulation that is shouting and screaming at me and telling me a message, and you are never going to click on any single one of them. In fact, I'm the only one who's able to click today. So how do you measure that engagement? And that's a challenge for me as a technologist, as an innovator. Not how do I get you to click, but how do I measure what you're trying to do? And I have to turn the question around, especially as we start thinking, as we're moving out from here, 2015, we start talking about this whole notion of where privacy is going to become paramount for our conversation. If you're going to get anywhere near this Minority Report addressable advertising, billboards that talk to us, it means that we, as an entire industry, are going to have to understand that it's the consumers that hold the power, and we have to find ways of communicating with them if they want to actually communicate with us through the technology that we have at our disposal. It also means that this notion of how we have broken out of our bedrooms into our lounge, we've taken the fixed desktops into the laptops, was only stage one. It's how we're sort of moving into this whole world of what does the computer of tomorrow look like? And all we find is, as we envisage this, it becomes more natural, it becomes more organic in terms of something that I'm doing or wearing or touching or feeling. It's not a device that's a physical box anymore. They reckon over the next 20 years, your computer will be a little contact lens. So the idea of having a mobile phone will seem crazy. Even Google Glasses will seem crazy because it'll be there in terms of a contact lens. It'll all be there as a chip that you put probably behind your eye or whatever we dream of next or wherever we're going. But all the essence of this is the fact that it has to become much more natural for me as a human being first. And so I have this problem. We talk about smart homes. We talk about the connected devices. I actually find it being quite, I look at technology today, and it seems to almost be a little bit more disconnected in terms of what the actual homes are. Yes, I'm wiring the house up and I'm making it automated, but you sort of look at the house that you would have if you had the money, and it doesn't look like this flashing, twinkling, silver, chrome environment. In fact, anything, people sort of want to go back because as human beings, first and foremost, we're concerned about the things of comfort, of home comforts. And so it really is, we need to always make the consumer feel comfortable if we want to work with them and find technology that's going to help them become easier to sort of transparent around it. Because this whole idea of coming home isn't about come to my house and see my gadgets. It's about come home. And that feeling of coming home is those soft furnishings. And the radical difference between how, I look at something and how, our girlfriend would look at something, when she looks at a house and a home, she's thinking about scented candles. She's thinking about hot bubble baths and all the things that make her feel home. And no matter how much we progress in the technology and the gadgets, so whether my TV gets twice the size and flatter and thinner and whatever else, those things are never going to change. And it's fundamental that we as digital marketers understand how we find new ways and push the technology of what does the laptop now look like? And what does the mobile now do? It's not about saying, let's take a web browser and put it on a mobile phone. It's rethinking mobile. It's rethinking everything. How do we make things more convenient where a person is? It's about where the design and the desire connect together. It's emotion. It's about stimulating those connections. And so to me, the best way I thought about this was, when I first got into gadgets or looked at gadgets, it was James Bond. He had the cars, he had the girls, he certainly had the drinks. And, for being a Brit, that was a lovely thought process. And this whole idea of, sat-nav in a car, telephones in a car. And yet what we used to dream of, science fiction, is now fact. And then you suddenly think about, what is this license to think we've got? Especially when you sort of look at something more recent, and you're looking at a BMW 7 Series that's been able to be controlled via your mobile phone. Well, I got them to pull in a BMW 7 Series, and I asked you to go and look at it. Not because it's the new electric, but because it's a hybrid, because there's two things going on here. The amount of technology and screens in this baby totally challenge everything I think of about television, mobile, digital, because the technology that sits within this car, not just to be able to drive it and make it more environmentally friendly, but it's the fact that it's not just some kind of futuristic, it's become very much organically ingrained within an everyday motor vehicle. And the technology that we're seeing is just happening, moving further on as we go into this situation. Screens. What does radio in a car look like? Well, first of all, it's going to be connected to the internet. And you're going to become the DJ. The second thing that'll happen is it'll become visual. And once it's visual, it means it becomes interactive. And at that point, when it's interactive, what does radio advertising look like when it's both visual and interactive? And it's not about pumping a banner into a browser. It's about showing me something and saying, do you feel hungry? Because if you do, touch the screen and I'll show you how to get there. And it's to make things very easy in the next stage as we go through. It's the new Tesla. It's almost like two iPads strapped back to back. And that's their console. And you talk to it, you touch it, you speak to it. The whole engine management systems. And every car manufacturer on the planet. Cars will be the most expensive computers we own. And the stuff that they'll do, they'll drive themselves. They're already parking themselves. And so this new notion of digital means that we have to understand digital in a much wider perspective than we have had in the past. And it means that these concepts are too cold and alien when really, as much as we need to bring it back into more of a reality, the reality is, well, let's just go retro, because suddenly I feel comfortable with retro. And it's almost rather, as much as we go forwards, we also have to go backwards. Because I care about things like hand-stitched leather, the double stitching around the back of my dashboard. Those things matter to me as much as whatever gadget they put inside. And there are lots of them. TV, mass media. What does it mean in our new world? And so suddenly we find ourselves sort of surrounded as we sort of look at the next generation. And are they really passive or are they active in their engagement? Because there's a little kid anywhere in the world, anywhere in the country, sitting there watching television, except how he sees television isn't necessarily the way that you saw television when you were a kid and his age. And it totally challenges this whole idea of, well, what do we mean between this whole idea of black and white, old media and new media, this traditional and this digital? And we try and keep breaking them down into different terms. We keep putting these silos in place. We talk about television or PC. We talk about offline or online. We talk about leaning back or maybe leaning forwards. And we keep in our heads in the media world splitting these things apart. But to a consumer, I don't think they see that. They've got everything they can search for and do now on their smart televisions, and they put a TV tuner card and they're sitting there recording stuff and watching it on their laptops and PCs. And so suddenly those terms, that phraseology we've grown up with in media, doesn't necessarily mean anything to a consumer. Because when I'm watching television content, if I'm watching 24 on my iPad, I don't think of myself as being online. I'm watching TV. Because TV's content. We try and call it video, but no, I'm watching telly. So what do you mean by when you're watching TV? And this is how the consumers have already taken a step forwards beyond where we're at today. Leaning back. Is this kid leaning back, I ask you? Watch any teenager trying to watch TV, and he can't sit still for 2 seconds. He's flicking the channels. And then you go to the other end of the spectrum and you see an old guy, maybe in any cafe, and this was in Kuala Lumpur, and I sat there and watched this guy, and tell me he's leaning forward. Because he was just sitting there quite happily, having his lunch, watching a movie. And suddenly this digital and online lean back, lean forward doesn't really mean much in this kind of idea of this world. This notion of sitting around consuming. We've been interacting and leaning forward with content for the last 20, 30 years. And every iteration, that big screen becomes a much more interactive device. It becomes social in a very different perspective. And so these kids are very much about leaning forward into the biggest screen in their home. And technology is finding easier ways, and we'll look at some of these things today with our partners. What does it mean when I can suddenly get involved with the content and play with your brand? We have this idea that Apple is going to rechange the world. Consumers right now are pumped of what they think the next generation television is going to look like. I'm going to be able to talk to it. It'll be 3D without glasses. It'll have apps. It'll have all these things that I want and imagine it to do, and Apple are going to create it for me. Because the desire right now is that consumers are pushing technologists to say, get me the gadgets that I want. I want to be able to do what I want, where I want to do it. And I could be there in the middle of a jungle, and I sat there and pulled out my iPhone, and this little girl was looking over my shoulder and wanted to sit there and play around. And I handed it over and showed her a game, and she was there. Suddenly her friends came over, and they were looking at it. And her little brother, suddenly came over, and I pulled out my iPad. Well, his eyes just lit up, didn't they? He'd never seen one before, but I didn't teach him how to use it. She automatically showed him, and then he took it off her and wouldn't give her it back. And he was sitting there playing her. It was intuitive. How many times have I spoken to my non-digital friends and said, right, press the big red Smartie at the front and then use your mouse to sit there and do that. And then wait for it. And when it comes up with that flashing, gone. Thing of the past, waiting for something to start up and crash and boot and doing this with the screens and whatever. Gone. We've moved on. And I think we're actually all too old to understand digital, because these kids, how they look at it is very different. 50% of all under 15s will use touchscreens by 2015. And so it means that things like Microsoft and Apple and Google are pushing the technology. Samsung, TV needs to become touchscreen. You know, this whole idea of talking to your television. You know, this is something at CES this year where you're able to shout and scream.
Channel up. Channel up.
Now, I'm not quite sure how it works in your house, but if you're in my home and you're turning around and saying, "Will you sit down and shut up?" the TV will be doing this, you know, flick, 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 you know, changing the channel. So obviously technology's got to catch up and find a more way of working with us in a better way. But we're certainly moving in. So they were kind of with this idea last year of saying, well, I love this. This is a great brand slogan. Do you mind? Because the idea is you think the channel and it changes for you. Turn the volume up. You don't even have to say it. And it does it. On air becomes online. And mobile. Places where they still have only got a TV between a street or an internet cafe between a village. And yet none of them can do their business without mobile. None of them. You know, and so suddenly this whole notion of what we're looking at, flicking around here, this world that we're sort of looking at here, well, sort of look at how many 7 billion people in the world, and what was it, 5.6 billion have now got a mobile phone, or there's 5-6 million handsets on there. You know, that's actually more than most people have got a toothbrush. There's only about 4.3 billion of us own a toothbrush. So more people right now have a mobile phone than a toothbrush. Now, if there's not an app opportunity, data. Last year, more data was generated by individuals than in the entire history of mankind. Take all of it together from the pyramids right the way up to today, and in 1 year, we trumped it all. That speed. You know, the internet, 6 petabytes of data they estimate the worth of it is. By 2015, we've got all these different devices talking to each other. Mobile alone will be 6 exabytes. Put that in English, that's 1,000 times the size of your entire internet today will be transmitted via your mobile phone each year. That's the change that's happening, the shift that we're going through right now. And why? Well, part of it is because of television, video. The demand for 4G is all about video. It's about going from analog to digital to web to personal. And when I go to Asia, Japan, I love Japan. And when I first went to Japan, and I was like imagining everyone to have these touch screens, you know, the iPhones, all the rest of it, and they've all got these little clamshell phones, and I couldn't understand it. I thought, I had one of those like 20 years ago. And so I was in a meeting, and in a very formal Japanese culture, they sat there, they opened it up, they used it as a stand, and they put it there in front of them. And you were having this conversation, and whatever, and suddenly went, "Way!" Because somebody had just scored a goal. And I thought, oh, how rude. They're sitting there watching TV while I am talking. And then suddenly realizing that when I'm at home, someone is like saying, well, why are you tweeting while we're in a room together? Or we're out in a pub and I'm Facebooking people. I think, how rude. The next situation will be television. And how that'll change. You know, I sat and watched my guys the other day. We're watching the cricket whilst working. And so this whole notion, mobile has changed around, you're comparing. In fact, how many of you have ever done this? You've gone into a shop and searched for something, a product, yeah? It's a lot of people. Apparently 63% of us, last stats I saw, are now doing this. Look at your first social media website. So before you were Facebooking or LinkedIn and finding friends you haven't spoken to for 20 years, you cared about things that really did matter to you, and that's money. Because if you're going to spend it, you want to make sure that something you're buying isn't going to fall apart in 2 seconds. And so we started looking at what you thought about the product, not the advertiser. Amazon was the first social media website. And that's something that we've got to understand as the idea of, well, if we're searching, how do we make searching easier? As it becomes more organic, it becomes more visual. How do we sit there and actually close that, not just a visual search, but adding it to my shopping basket? Delivering it to me as soon as I get off the train in Seoul in Korea, there is my basket of goods waiting for me because I sat there and interacted with it on a billboard in a subway on the way home. Continually pushing the notion of where they're now saying, well, fine, We'll put shops wherever they are. I don't have to build a shop anymore. I just have to print one and stick it on wherever billboard I want to. That's where we're getting closer to the purchase closing the cycle. And then it opens up the other opportunity with mobile, which is communication, social. Yep, apparently 80% of all Facebook and tweets actually come from the bathroom. That suddenly changes the next time you look at your Twitter feed, doesn't it? You think, ooh. And you kind of realize, you used to sit there and read the newspaper. Now you're tweeting. You're commenting on someone else's Facebook photograph. And they're having a conversation with you and they've got no idea. Now you're sitting there with your pants around your ankles. That's kind of a crazy world where we're suddenly now talking to our telephones. We're communicating in a very different way. We're looking at different sorts of things of where this whole idea of this internet of things is starting to take place, where we're starting to connect every device on the planet. You go to the bathroom downstairs, you don't need to touch. Wave your hand. Because I don't want to touch it after you've touched it, thanks. It's more hygienic. The whole idea of my dad as a kid saying, have you flushed the toilets? Have you turned the lights off? Have you closed the door? We don't live in a field. Gone. As sensors around the place turn lights on and off, they turn water on and off, heating comes on and off. And suddenly we're crying out this whole idea of paper becoming intelligent and smart. The idea of walking into a supermarket and those boxes that you're saying used to say, hey, little gift for the children, is now suddenly twinkling at me with messages that I'm able to control remotely via Wi-Fi and suddenly be able to draw their attention in. How long before that turns around and says, I like what you've got in your shopping basket, but I can give it 2 for 1. Or I can give you it cheaper here. Because I know your proximity, I know what device you're carrying, and I know where you are. Clothes, perfume, digital perfume. I'm still waiting to see my first digital scratch and sniff campaign. That'll be awesome. But it's coming. This idea of electronic point of sale, putting my hand in, reading my biology and telling me exactly what skincare products I need. And I was Kimberly Clark, and we saw this in Cannes a couple of years ago. It's quite funny. I sat there in Cannes a couple of years ago, and I watched everyone getting really excited by this interactive tampon machine that they'd done. And the idea was you literally had a card, and you touched it, and you were able to touch your screen. And oh, wow, it's made it cool again. Taking a terrible, really complicated, confusing, I'm not sure I want to talk about this product, and suddenly making it very fun and sexy for the children and youth of today. By making an interactive tampon machine. And they're all going, oh, how wonderful. And I was watching everybody. And I'm thinking, how disgusting. You're touching something in a bathroom. Why should I not be able to talk or wave my hand? And as innovative as we keep trying to be, we have to understand the consumer and keep pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing until we make it totally and utterly acceptable and organic for them. Not just in touch, but in using the next wave of technology to go even beyond touch. Using these sensors, being able to say, well, does my bum look big in this? As I try on the product that I've just seen on the TV commercial, stop, pause, play, where? Buy. And so we sit there and looking at how we can push things on, and we end up with ubiquitous computing. These whole ideas of these, computers that we used to all talk to became personal. They changed shape and size. They still change shape and size. But then we move into this next world of ubiquitous, where we are surrounded by little computers. Behold your new cookie, a cookie for the real world. See, when the European law was passed about cookies, it wasn't just actually mentioning cookies in there. It talks about the electronic connection points, and one of those technologies it absolutely stipulated was RFID, radio frequency identification, because they were trying to preempt what is actually now happening. As every product has got a unique code, every product is talking to the internet. There are now 1 trillion of these on the planet. You walk through Tokyo, and suddenly your mobile phone, if you go in front of an art installation, it comes up and says, what language? I know what language you're in. Do you want to find out about it? And suddenly I'm able to watch a video about a product, and it says, do you want to see the next one? Well, walk down the street, and you walk. Says, no, not that way, this way. And it directs me to the next product in an art installation. And yet I could take you to the Metro store here in Germany, and that does exactly the same technology is in place in the Metro store in a shopping scenario. And suddenly we're finding that these personally identifiable devices, everyday objects, are now being tracked 24/7, 365. This vision that we have of Minority Report is becoming connected, not through your eyes, but as we get used to these mobile payment centers, near-field communication, as we are predicting the next wave of devices that are going to give me a personal, targeted device. So you go through Shinjuku Station in Tokyo, and the sensors around, the cameras do a scan, and they work out age, gender, en masse, and then start homing in the creative messages based on your profile as a mass. But then you go up and you touch something here, and it now knows that it's me, my mobile phone, and suddenly delivers me a personalized message. McDonald's did the same thing, throwing stuff out there. Mass media saw who responded, saw who paid, saw where they're going, and was able to start targeting messages down to a consumer. And so what we're seeing is this next wave of technology, the questions that we have are genuinely going to answer a lot of these questions. As by 2016, apparently you're going to be able to walk around every major city in Europe and leave your wallet at home or your credit card at home because you'll be paying for it with your mobile. Which means if you've got a child here under the age of 6 months, a year, the chances are, by the time they're 5, they will never, ever have to use cash or a credit card. By the time they're getting pocket money at 9 or 10, cash will seem crazy. So we are living in a situation where the next generation now will genuinely be a cashless generation. And we've already started to see the trends, haven't we? This shift, this mass consumer buying, linking loyalty programs, social media, mobile commerce. That's where the real dollars are going to be. And this is where the real data is going to sit. If we really want to understand the consumer engagement, it's taking this, well, did they see and did they buy? Not did they click, did they interact, did they buy? It's taken this point of engagement, overlaying it with the interaction transaction, and that gives me the full consumer life cycle, the data points that I'm looking for. And it's not just one technology, it's several. It's overlaying all sorts of different technologies together to try and understand where the consumer is. Trying to understand where they are in the journey. Did they see something? Did they interact? Can I lock onto them and target them? Do I know what screen you're in front of and being able to start really homing in the message and drive the conversion? And in our future vision, notice that there is no laptops, possibly. And in our digital world, we take an old school mentality, which is engagement, in terms of a visual engagement, and overlay it with the digital targeting and interaction, and ultimately drive the purchases, and suddenly we have an understanding of what does attribution really look like. And this is the challenge that we have to look at. And I'll leave you on one last thought. 42% of you are now sitting there playing with iPads or phones whilst watching telly. What are you doing? Well, you're still checking your email. You're searching, you're chatting about something on social media, because the biggest thing we talk about on social media is what I've just seen on TV. But there's something down here, looking up stuff related to advertising. 25% of us go online after seeing a TV ad. The connection is hugely powerful, and suddenly it's search and display in a very scalable manner. That figure is only going to go up as we suddenly find that consumers are getting used to interacting with TV or finding additional content around their television. As we take a search engine mentality and apply it to video, where those meta keywords suddenly become ingrained against products or people or actors and actresses that are there in the show. So the next time you're watching that show, however old it is, guess what we trigger at the same time? In real time. And that was a challenge that, one of the big TV shows in the UK, £1 Million Drop, challenged us with. They said, look, we know people are sitting there at home shouting at the television when the TV program's on. And so what we thought is, well, why don't we create an interactive game? And that's what they did. They created this play-along game at home. And so you could play along, and you didn't shout at it, you played along with it in a web browser. And they said, well, lovely, but when it turns to an ad break, the game stops. Wouldn't it be great if at the same time I could push an ad to the TV, from a TV to the laptop? So we thought about it, and we said, well, we've got the TV assets anyway. We're sitting on them. Why don't we fingerprint them? Why don't we put a code behind them? And so suddenly, we put the systems into place. So when we serve them out through our playout systems, you walk in the room with your device, it listens, and at the same time as then, we go and check, do we know what this product is? Can we trigger an online ad and push it down? That process takes about 10 seconds. It's consumer activated. It works on mobile, it's got a microphone, and I've got a client who wants to push something down to a laptop without one. I turn the page in my magazine, the ad's there. I change my web page, the ad is there. Why do I want someone to click and wait 10 seconds for an ad to download? We solved that 12 years ago with Rich Media.
Make us the most fuel efficient.
Why am I going to go backwards?
In America.
And so what we had to look at and say, look, this whole idea, we have to break it down. If we're sitting on the assets, why don't we put the technology into the broadcast systems so already we know when these TV programs are being played out. So when you're coming along, you're already able to do the pre-checking or whatever, so you just happen to open up your app, and suddenly we're able to push that content down into whatever app or whatever browser you've got open. And that all happens in less than 2 seconds,
And sometimes
even quicker.
creates its own.
And that's where we got to with Channel 4 last year. So when the TV ad came on, we were able to push down the creative in exactly the same time. 115,000 bits of data telling me who's just watched and how many clicked, if I want to look at how many clicks. And when we look at things like that number up there, one ad campaign, Nielsen, 25,000 homes in the US. It's 4 or 5 times that data in one ad campaign. We've gone from assumed to accurate television measurement. And everything we know about media changes in that instant.
I'm Kevin Pollak, and this is the $1 Million Money Drop. Absolutely unforgettable experience. On a standard U.S. touch-tone telephone, what numbers spell out the lead singer of U2? Talk it over.
Anyone got any ideas? Any numbers? Well, that's what's going to happen. You have to sit there and you open up your app, you're playing along at home, and suddenly, you're sitting there at home and you're playing, and you're watching the TV and the ad break comes on. And so you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay. And in a split second, whatever I'm watching
Faced
on
with
TV
becoming nothing,
is there on my companion device.
we fight.
Okay, we can push the video down, but this time, let's use Rich Media. Let's create an interactive experience. Take me in a deeper, engaging experience.
Mass Effect.
Trying to get me to convert.
Rated M for mature.
Perhaps it's
Better
taken me
with
another
Kinect for
level
Xbox
beyond that
360.
again. There is the next advert I'm coming along with. I'm this time, I'm seeing something,
Luxury or it isn't.
and it's coming down with a car commercial.
Car with a standard power move.
Well, how else are we able to take them a stage further? Well, let me spin the car around. Let me choose the color I want to have a look at. Let me see what it looks like for me.
Keyless access, then your choice.
And then suddenly I've got this idea of being able to
Lexus
target people,
ES.
knowing where
It's
they are.
complete luxury in a class full of compromise.
And you're able to take a
It's the
rich
2012
media
ES 350
ideology
$79 a month
and
for
apply
36
it
months.
to television.
$41.79 due at signing. See your Lexus dealer.
Driving a purchase. And then suddenly the ad changes to pretty girl, and I'm thinking, oh, what's this all about? And it's all about buying flowers. Sex doesn't sell. Well, if it's going to sell, then make it sell. Let me choose what bunch of flowers and let me press order now.
Guys, Valentine's Day is not that
And suddenly I don't assume, or did they convert, or did they go and look? I know, because I'm able to sit there and say, how many products did I sell as a result of that TV ad? Or maybe I want to soften it up a little bit and play a game. And because I want to play a game, because if I can play a game along with the television, and so it's completely changing and going around, and if I can get the guy to do stuff as quick as, I can do, oops, missed him there, I'm able to sit there and play around here, then perhaps I give them a voucher. So next time they're in the shop, we're able to deliver that experience down. It's taking a digital and a traditional, and you mash them together, and we suddenly end up with this very different world. What do we mean by dub, dub, dub? Well, it means this whole idea is convergence. It's whatever, whenever, wherever. And that is where we have to look at a focus. We're looking at the data and how do you reuse that to target the consumers in a very different way. And as we'll find out through today, from established companies like Microsoft or Cisco, right the way through to some of the startup technologies we're going to showcase with you here today, it's about how do we, at the heart of it, make technology work better and more organic and simpler for a consumer. And how do you as a marketer get the data, and that data that you're really looking for, which is, well, how many of them bought my product as a result of that investment? And that's what we're here to help you do. So thank you very much.